Hello everyone, I'm Kristin Chalmers. Thank you for watching my presentation on affinity diagramming for PRM 613 for the St. Mary's University, Minnesota. To begin, I just want to review the outline for the presentation. I do just want to take a moment to review this and just talk about what I will be talking about today and what I will be presenting on. I do have 4 agenda items that I would like to discuss regarding these affinity diagrams. To begin, I would like to discuss the definition of an affinity diagram, what they are and what they can be used for and how they can be useful. As with all tools worth using, there are advantages and disadvantages to using the tool. These educate our decision to use the tool in a specific circumstance and can help us understand when the tool may be more useful than others. From there, we'll look at a step-by-step process of creating the affinity diagram, and we can actually look at how you can create your own affinity diagram and what the best practices are just to ensure that we are getting the most out of this tool. And then we'll also take a look at an example that I've put together in regards to my team project for a dog wash, and just taking a look at the survey results and creating an affinity diagram based off of those. And of course, we will also review the references and reading material that helped me understand and analyze this tool. In my research on affinity diagrams, I did compile a few definitions that I found from the readings. I found a few very good ones, which I would like to share today. The first was by Hazelden in 2003, which described an affinity diagram as a tool for organizing information into natural groupings. Although this is fairly vague, I thought it to be a really good definition of the basic function of an affinity diagram. The other one was from NHS and says that an affinity diagram is a graphic tool designed to help organize loose, unstructured ideas generated in the brainstorming or problem solving meetings, and gathers large amounts of language data. So this would be ideas, opinions, and issues, and organizes them into groupings based on their natural relationships. I really do like this definition because it is so descriptive of what an affinity diagram can do and what it can be used for. This also gives us a sense of the uniqueness of affinity diagrams, how they can be used as a supplement to brainstorming, multi-voting, and the nominal group technique to see a problem differently and to use a group to the project's advantage and incorporate all of their ideas. And I also want to show a brief example of what an affinity diagram is. This is one of the most basic and user-friendly ways to create an affinity diagram shown here. It's very simple. The basic concept is that you have a lot of ideas and topics based around a certain prompt. A large group of people will generate the ideas, and once they have, the ideas are grouped into different categories. This helps us group our ideas and manage the chaos that may come with the brainstorming process. In this affinity diagram, the different individuals used different color post-it notes so they would be able to keep track of the different team members' ideas. Other more complicated affinity diagrams can be completed as well. These can be used to assure quality using a data-driven approach, as demonstrated by Pashar 2016, or it can also be used to drive a more inclusive classroom, as demonstrated by Hazelden 2003. There are several uses for affinity diagrams. There are many advantages to the affinity diagram method. First of all, it's simple. Shortly, we will see how easy it is to create an affinity diagram and how easy it is to understand the basic concept. It also supports innovation and causes breakthroughs through that it fosters and organizes ideas. The organization of the variety of ideas creates the basis for a productive discussion on the topic at hand. One of the most important advantages to the affinity diagram, in my opinion, is that it allows for the involvement of each team member. Anyone who's been in a team meeting with more than 5 people knows that some team members are more assertive in conversation, while others may be more introverted. This results in some ideas being heard more than others based on nothing more than the team members' voices speaking more loudly than others. Affinity diagrams circumvent this by allowing everyone to write down their ideas and thoughts. It also promotes the bigger picture. Through the process of clustering, the team is encouraged to look at larger categories as opposed to focusing on the details. This also comes to the last advantage that it can help organize some of the chaos that may come with large sets of data and big ideas. From this perspective, affinity diagrams are beginning to look like a very powerful tool that professional settings can use to foster innovation, allow everyone's voice to be heard, and to organize the chaos of large data sets. Unfortunately, no tools or method comes without disadvantages, and affinity diagrams are no exception to this. A few notable disadvantages include their convenience and the fact that a skilled moderator is needed to effectively utilize the tool. Otherwise, large data can get lost and the activity may end up being aimless. Also, these tools are not convenient. You do need a fair amount of supplies to be able to create one, and you can't just pull up your computer and create one just on the spot. In addition, affinity diagrams in their raw form are not portable. So kind of along the same theme, they are usually quite large and must be photographed to be recorded. Generally, when created with a large group of people, the post-it note configurations can lack structure and the original intention of the category may be lost. And this moves us on to our next section, how to create an affinity diagram. This is what we all came here for, so we can just get started with 4 steps on how to create an affinity diagram. Super simple process, like I said, and we can just get started with step 1. The first step to creating an affinity diagram is to gather data. This could include brainstorming or interview responses, results of a survey, and opinions of team members, any data that needs to be understood as part of the affinity diagramming process. This data is usually also language-based, meaning that it is qualitative instead of quantitative in nature. So therefore, it includes more data that's difficult to immediately categorize. In this process, large groups will be separated into smaller groups so that the communication can be done within the smaller groups rather than the large one, just for ease of communication and for just so everyone can get a word in. And step 2 is to write down the data on post-it notes or cards. Once this has been done, you can stick them up on a wall or a board. From there, you can begin to the next step. And step 3 is clustering. From there, you can allow the team members to silently begin clustering the items. Sometimes it may be unclear if a specific card allows in one or another category, or if it belongs in one or another category. That's really okay. You can just write another card with the same data point and prescribe it to 2 categories. Precision is not key in this process. George et al. 2005 writes that silence is critical. Um, as we mentioned earlier, some team members have a tendency to talk more than others, and it is important that we do not let team members sway others in this process. And step 4 is to label the categories. So after step 3, when we have clustered everything, we can actually start to label all the categories that we've come up with during the clustering process. This also must be done organically and democratically. The monitor must go from table to table to ask them to come up with a category of the clusters. Once the clusters have been labeled, you can also cluster some of the clusters into smaller groups. This would be for additional minimization and additional organization of the ideas that have been put forth through brainstorming. So now we've figured out how to actually create an affinity diagram. We finished that, we know how to do that. So now we can move on to an example. I have compiled survey data from a dog wash that my team is currently writing up the project documents for. And this just kind of gives us a better idea of the real life application of an affinity diagram. So this slide shows the 14 survey responses from the dog wash that was administered by Team Y. So these are different responses from different goers of or attendees of the event. Of course, when we actually do put together an event like this, or when we put together a real affinity diagram, we probably want a little bit more information than 14 responses, but this is just good for an example, just to give us an idea of how to put together an affinity diagram. At this point, the dog wash has been finished and the surveys have been handed out throughout the grounds the entire day. In order to keep the surveys as unbiased as possible, the dog wash workers also provided an incentive of dog treats to anyone who turned in a survey. Overall, many surveys were received. Now, the challenge is to organize the data received so that they can be incorporated into the lessons learned document and so that future projects can learn from them. This also helps give some perspective to the data. So if we only received one complaint about hygiene, for example, we can compare that to our quality metrics and just kind of take a look at what is allowable versus what we ended up receiving. This slide shows all of the survey results. So this is the raw data that is needed to create the affinity diagram, which is completed throughout the day. Step 2 is to write the data down on Post-it notes or cards. The data was already written down in the surveys. Now, all what we need to do is just transfer that information from the surveys and from written interviews or in-person interviews to cards so we can begin the clustering phase. So all of this data has been transferred from a survey form to the card form in the yellow cards that we're looking at in this slide. And step 3 is clustering. First of all, I do want to apologize about the formatting here. VoiceThread does change formatting a little bit from PowerPoint, so I do apologize about that. But this is when we group all of the cards into different categories. So we can take a look at the cards and see what they say. So the first one says, there were a few dogs who were being really disruptive. I began to become concerned for my dog's safety and opted to leave because of this. Second one says, I saw one dog getting pretty rowdy. It made me uncomfortable letting my dog off leash. The next one says, it was a really great time. The volunteers that were working the event were wonderful. However, one of the food truck vendors was kind of rude to me. Someone else says, I had a wonderful time, no complaints, except there was one food vendor that was kind of rude at Krusty's Pizza. So presumably that's a food truck vendor. So to begin clustering, we need to begin reading the survey results like we just did. We can also just group the sections organically. Any cards that belong in 2 piles can be copied and added to both, and we can brainstorm as we see fit. And an ideal example, there would be multiple individuals doing the organizing. However, in this example, I was the only one available to organize my cards. So we're really only working off of my opinion of what categories these survey results should fit into. I noticed that there were some complaints about a rude food truck vendor, so I grouped those into a pile. I also noticed that there were concerns about the safety event with so many dogs being in close quarters, and then I also put those in a cluster as well. And these are just the remainder of the survey results. So just to read a few, one says, you're really loud. I dropped by to write this. It was disruptive. So this was a little bit of a standalone survey result. All of the different colors are the different clusters that I put these into. So you can see green is one cluster, blue is another cluster, pink is one other one, and then also the baby blue to the right, that's another cluster. So that's how I organized them for this one, since we didn't have so much space. I thought it was the best option as opposed to organizing them spatially. And the fourth step is to label the categories. So you can see here, we just kind of took a look at these categories and we kind of summarized what they were saying. So there was the noise complaint, the noise complaint saver result to the right. That stands alone because no one else had that complaint. So then we can just put that in its own category for noise complaints. There are the 3 survey results or 4 survey results that mentioned the rude food vendor, and then the 2 survey results that mentioned that they were concerned about safety for their dogs. There was one complaint about the lack of vegetarian options and one complaint from a disgruntled community member. Contrasting some other complaints, many dog owners felt like their dogs were perfectly safe and appreciated the expert support to take care of them and ensure their safety. Also, contrastingly, many dog wash goers really enjoyed the food options, and many liked that their dogs could be washed for free, which seemed to be the biggest positive of the event. This also demonstrates how some data points may contradict each other. So not everything needs to line up perfectly. Of course, these are survey results and these are people, and they all have their own perspective and opinion on how well the event went and how comfortable they felt at the event. And once the cards have been all clustered, we can understand what the greatest complaints are and what the greatest positives of the dog wash are. This helps us analyze the data so that it can be put into the lessons learned report in whatever format the project manager chooses. And thank you for watching my presentation. This just kind of shows all of my references. It shows the scholarly resources that I used, as well as I certainly did use textbook resources as well, including the George et al. 2005, the Lean Six Sigma Pocket Book. That was something that I certainly made a lot of use for. So thank you so much for watching, and have a good rest of your week.